When the massive ships of the Galactic Empire entered Earth's atmosphere, the dark sky suddenly filled with bright lights. It was as if the sky had torn apart, and a terrifying threat was descending upon the world. Instead of quietly conquering Earth, the Empire wanted to display its full power. This grand entrance was meant to instill fear in the hearts of humans. But there was something the Empire didn't know. Fear had become a weapon for humanity. In a secret resistance base hidden deep within a forested valley, Alan reviewed his strategy, studying a map in his hands. Outside, there was a subtle tension in the crowd. Everyone was aware of the Empire's overwhelming power. But to Alan, this tension was just another advantage. Julian approached Alan with determined steps. His short hair, weary eyes, and battle scars seemed to carry the weight of war. "Alan," he said, his voice firm, "they're much stronger this time. It feels like we don't stand a chance against their technology. We've tried before, and every time we've been pushed back." Without looking up from the map, Alan smiled slightly. "You're right, Julian," he replied calmly, "but we aren't fighting them. In fact, what we're really up against is their arrogance." Julian looked at him, confused. Alan continued, "The Empire doesn't think we're capable of being complex. Humans do the unexpected. Our plans can render their technological superiority completely useless." "Are we creating chaos?" Julian asked, frowning. "How do you know it will work?" Alan turned to him. "Chaos is an organized power's greatest enemy. We're going to break their rules, keep moving, and never attack the same way twice. Their technology will slow them down because they're not as adaptable as we are." Just then, Ilara's voice came through the radio. "Alan, the Empire's ships are moving into the forest. They're getting closer. What are your orders?" Alan stood up suddenly. "This is their weak spot. We begin now," he said, turning to his team. "Is everything ready?" Julian nodded slightly. "Yes, everyone is in position." Ilara, leading her reconnaissance unit, was observing the area where the Imperial ships were landing. The ships, like massive metal monsters, descended through the treetops. The sound of lights and engines reverberated through the forest. As the Imperial soldiers began their fully armored descent, Ilara relayed the information through her radio. "Landing is almost complete. They're ready, but we're more prepared." Alan took a deep breath. "Initiate the plan," he ordered coldly. When Julian returned to the command center, weapons were being distributed in the underground armory. Everyone had taken their positions, ready to attack. Meanwhile, the traps Alan had set up in various locations were silently activated. Before the Imperial soldiers could realize what had happened, they would disappear into the darkness of the forest. As the Imperial soldiers stepped onto the ground, they encountered no resistance. A quiet forest greeted them, with only the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. But this silence was the calm before the storm. From a distant hill, Ilara watched the landing site through binoculars. Her eyes tracked the soldiers as they advanced in an orderly formation. Just then, Alan's plan went into motion. A deafening explosion echoed through the forest. The vanguard of the Imperial forces was thrown into the air before they even realized what had hit them. Mines hidden under the forest floor had turned the area into a living hell. The chaos created by the explosions caught the Imperial soldiers off guard. As they frantically tried to give each other orders, the surroundings filled with shadows that vanished into the dark. Julian and a group of resistance fighters launched an attack from the depths of the forest. Emerging from the bushes, the small units struck the Imperial soldiers with hit-and-run tactics. Each one changed positions within seconds, disappearing from sight and preparing for the next strike. Julian, breathing heavily, moved forward in the darkness. He coordinated silently with the fighters beside him as he searched for a target with his old model rifle. The Imperial soldiers, with their modern armor and weapons, advanced slowly, while the human resistance struck from every corner with small-scale attacks. Every explosion, every gunshot, only created more confusion. An Imperial officer shouted orders into his radio. "Hold your formation. They're just a few people. Don't get caught up in this chaos." But things weren't that simple. Their communication systems had been disrupted, and each soldier was left to fend for themselves. Ilara's team had silently infiltrated the rear of the Imperial forces. Moving without a sound, they waited for the perfect moment to strike the enemy's weakest point. Alan's strategy was working perfectly, turning the Empire's strength into its weakness. In chaos, the strong would win. Ilara gave a signal, and her team launched their attack simultaneously. With sniper precision, they targeted the enemy leaders, completely dismantling the Imperial troops' coordination. The enemy soldiers were left not knowing who was in command. As Alan gave his final instructions through the radio, a smile appeared on his face. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Prepare for even greater chaos." From the moment the Imperial troops landed on Earth, they had no idea what was coming. They expected an organized resistance, an army of desperate humans trying to hold their ground. But what they encountered was an unpredictable war. The guerrilla warfare tactics employed by the humans drew them into an unexpected turmoil. In the resistance base, hidden deep in the forest, Alan was observing the successful progression of the operation. Looking at the marked locations on the map, he could see that each trap and attack point was working as planned. But this was only the beginning. At the Imperial landing zone, the soldiers were quickly taking positions, but the chaos of the forest terrain was working against them. The vanguard had already been neutralized by explosions and ambushes. The traps Alan had set slowed the movements of the enemy troops, pulling them from one danger to another. The enemy, lost in the depths of the forest, had completely lost control. Julian was hiding behind a massive tree with a small team of resistance fighters. In the clearing ahead, Imperial soldiers were moving chaotically. Alan's calm voice came over the radio. "Phase 2. Ilara and her team are moving toward the enemy's armored vehicles. Don't waste any time." Julian observed the enemy through binoculars, and a moment of silence fell. "Now!" he shouted, and his team sprang into action. Their weapons fired, turning the forest into an instant battlefield. Short, precise shots, guerrilla tactics, were wearing down the enemy's nerves. After each shot, Julian quickly changed positions, moving to the next point before the enemy could target them. The Imperial soldiers were becoming increasingly desperate in the face of these disorderly attacks. The chain of command had broken, and communication between the units was almost completely lost. Alan's plan, which had begun with sabotaging the enemy's communication systems, was now working perfectly. The enemy's technological superiority was slowing them down. In the midst of the chaos, they were completely clueless. Meanwhile, Ilara's team was making slow but careful progress, moving toward the enemy's armored vehicles. Crawling on the ground, they stealthily approached the enemy lines, placing explosives with quiet precision. Ilara whispered orders into the radio. "Are the explosives set?" A resistance fighter responded shortly after. "Yes, all in place. We're just waiting for your command." Ilara took a deep breath. "All right. We detonate on signal." The explosives placed near the armored vehicles were a strategic move to eliminate the enemy's greatest advantage. Their armor could protect them from bullets, but these explosives were a different story. The Empire had always believed it was stronger than humans, relying too much on their technology. Ilara closed her eyes for a moment and gave the signal. A brief silence, then the sound of thunderous explosions. The armored vehicles were thrown into the air, each one torn to pieces. The enemy soldiers, stunned by the blasts, were scattered to the ground. Ilara, her face set with determination, turned back to the radio. "We did it. The armored vehicles are disabled. Now we need to act before the enemy regroups." Alan watched the situation unfold from his command post. He could see the enemy commanders trying to establish communication with each other, but the chaos was slowing them down. "Perfect," he murmured. "Now, we're going to break them completely." Julian and his resistance fighters had moved to another area where the Imperial soldiers were trying to retreat. With a fierce assault, another small unit was neutralized. "We're forcing them to retreat," Julian reported to Alan via radio. "But not to let them escape." The sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the forest, gradually forming a symphony of war. The enemy was met by different resistance groups at every turn, and, unable to decide what to do, they were hit by new attacks each time. Julian, targeting an Imperial soldier, approached silently and took him down. Then he quickly changed his position, launching another attack from his new hiding spot. Meanwhile, the panic among the enemy soldiers was growing. Disrupted communication, plummeting morale, and unexpected assaults had left them unable to cope. A commander, shouting desperately into the radio, was trying to give orders. "Hold your positions. Move as a unit. Don't try to defend on your own." But these orders were falling on deaf ears. The Imperial units were no longer one cohesive force. Each soldier seemed to be lost in the dark forest, fending for themselves. As Alan watched the battle unfold, a determined look appeared on his face. "Now we finish them," he said over the radio. "Everyone, get ready for the final attack." Ilara and Julian, with their respective teams, had cornered the enemy in one last location. Amid the explosives, sniper fire, and sudden assaults, the Imperial soldiers had completely lost control. Each resistance fighter moved swiftly, disappearing only to strike again from another point. Chaos had become the enemy's worst nightmare. The enemy's armored vehicles were destroyed, their communication lines severed, and morale utterly broken. Finally, the Imperial forces were forced to retreat. But this retreat was not a planned maneuver. It was a chaotic, disorganized escape. Ilara, watching the battlefield from a distance, took a deep breath. "We did it," she whispered to herself. "But this is only the beginning." The sounds of war echoing through the forest eventually faded into silence. But this silence was not the calm of victory. It was the herald of an even greater battle yet to come. Alan and his team had proven they could stand against the Empire. But the real war had only just begun. The forest was no longer silent. The metallic screams echoing after explosions, the crackling of burnt trees, and the frantic voices of Imperial soldiers trying to retreat. Yet, this noise was only the first ripple of the victory the Resistance had just claimed. The Empire was paying the price for underestimating humanity. Alan listened carefully to the reports coming through the radio as he observed the battlefield. Ilara's team was returning, and Julian was preparing to clear the last pockets of resistance. Alan knew they were still facing a formidable Imperial force, but now every advantage was in their hands. "They're weak now," Alan said calmly. "But weakness doesn't mean they aren't dangerous. It's time to deliver the final blow." Julian gathered his team as he listened to the orders over the radio. The battlefield had become chaotic, but the Resistance still moved swiftly and with purpose. "Is everyone ready?" Julian asked, locking eyes with the determined but weary faces of his team. "We're ready," one of them replied, checking his weapon. "Just waiting for your signal for the final assault." Alan, standing over the map, reviewed the strategy one last time before issuing his final commands. The remaining Imperial forces are trying to retreat. We're going to trap them completely. Seal off all exits. Don't let anyone escape." In a wide valley deep within the forest, where the Imperial forces were trying to make their escape, Julian and his team lay in wait. The Imperial soldiers, having lost most of their vehicles and with damaged armor, were demoralized and scattered. Their commanders were desperately trying to coordinate a retreat. Just then, a series of explosions erupted from the forest's dark depths, surrounding the valley on all sides. Julian's team had activated the explosives they had secretly planted around the area. The blasts closed off all the exits from the valley. Suddenly, the Imperial soldiers found themselves trapped. Julian peered through his binoculars and saw the panic-stricken Imperial commanders frantically barking orders. "Let's begin," he whispered into his radio. "No mercy. They didn't show us any." The first strike came from Ilara's sniper team. From the high ridges of the valley, the snipers picked off targets one by one, taking down key leaders of the Imperial forces, cutting off their chain of command. With each fallen commander, the chaos among the soldiers deepened. There was no one left to give orders. Imperial soldiers started running in every direction. Some tried to find an exit within the valley, while others attempted to flee into the dense forest. But wherever they ran, the resistance was there. Small resistance squads, hidden in every corner of the valley, launched fast and brutal attacks on the enemy forces. Julian signaled to his team and charged into the valley. The first wave of their assault left the Imperial soldiers completely defenseless. Even their heavy weapons were useless against the guerrilla tactics the resistance employed. The fighters moved in hit-and-run fashion, striking swiftly, then retreating only to strike again from a different angle. Julian, wielding his weapon with precision, advanced through the enemy lines. His team followed suit, firing short bursts before quickly changing positions. The Imperial soldiers, unable to aim properly amidst the chaos, fired wildly in every direction. This disorganization was exactly what the Resistance's planned chaos tactic aimed for. A group of Imperial soldiers took cover behind a large boulder in the middle of the valley and tried to return fire. But Julian had spotted them. He signaled to his team, targeting the boulder. One of the Resistance fighters from Ilara's squad took aim and lobbed a small grenade into the spot where the soldiers had hunkered down. The explosion shattered the boulder, sending the soldiers flying. The valley was now filled with the sounds of explosions, gunfire, and screams. The Imperial soldiers were completely overwhelmed by the relentless assault. There was no escape. The Resistance had them cornered, controlling their every movement. As Julian advanced through the battlefield, he spotted a group of soldiers attempting to flee. He took a deep breath and radioed Ilara. "Close off the northern exit. Don't let them escape." Ilara relayed the order to one of her fighters perched on a ridge, and within moments, a series of hidden explosives at the northern end of the valley were triggered. As the Imperial soldiers approached that area, a massive explosion erupted, sealing the pass. There was now no way out. Alan watched the battle unfold from a distance, maintaining his stern expression. The plan was working perfectly. "Deliver the final blow," he ordered. "They tried to destroy us. Now, we'll finish them." After receiving the order, Julian took another deep breath, gripping his rifle tightly as he prepared for the final assault. "It ends here," he muttered to himself. The Resistance fighters surrounded the remaining Imperial soldiers in the valley. Ilara's team continued firing from the ridges, while Julian and his fighters moved swiftly, breaking through what was left of the enemy's defenses. Within minutes, the battlefield was entirely under the Resistance's control. What remained of the Imperial forces either surrendered or were completely wiped out. Alan listened to the victory reports coming in over the radio and exhaled deeply. "We did it," he murmured. But this was just one battle. The Empire will send more. Julian stood in the center of the battlefield, looking around. A group of tired but victorious resistance fighters gathered around him. "Yeah, they'll send more," he said. "But we'll be ready." Ilara turned to Alan with a proud smile. "Chaos was their downfall," she said. "They had the technology, but our resolve made their greatest weapons useless." Alan nodded in agreement. "Chaos is an art, Ilara, and we've mastered it. Now, we have the power to stand against the Empire." The echoes of victory resonating through the forest signaled that a much larger war was on the horizon. But humanity was ready to face it without fear. Alan and his resistance fighters had not only won a battle against the Galactic Empire, they had reignited their hope. And amidst the chaos, humanity would continue to resist. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.